Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and today very excited to be doing a new top 10 here on the channel. As you can see from the title of the video, it's a top 10 solo games which disappointed me. Yes, and just before we get into that, and I talked a little disclaimer before we move into that top 10 list, I want to mention the Rolling Solo Discord as well as the Rolling Solo Facebook group, which is continuing to grow and expand. And we've even actually opened up a Rolling Solo Steam group as well for individuals that are playing video games on their PC. There's multiple ways to connect with the community around solo gaming in these different areas and to be part of the conversations regarding crowdfunding campaigns, or if it just comes down to retail releases or just aspects of the hobby that you love, like painting and other things like that. So there's all these conversations happening, and we'd love to have you there. The links are in the pinned comment and video description. If you haven't joined one or all or any of them, definitely jump in. We'd love to have you there. Now, getting back to the subject of this video, which is the top 10 solo games which disappointed me, I want to say a disclaimer before I get going here that first off, this list isn't meant to stir the pot and cause a mass ruckus in terms of let's point out all the individuals who put time and effort behind these games and drag them through the dirt. That is not the purpose of the video. The purpose of this video is to give you the opposite side of the coin to what I typically do here on the channel, which is give top 10s that are the best games, in my opinion, of certain categories, genres, or maybe even publishers and different aspects like that. So it's kind of cool to do one that's on the opposite side. Again, these games are still fun to individuals. There's going to be people that are literally playing these solo games right now and loving them. Again, not every game is for everyone. So when I say that these games disappointed me, they may not be disappointing other individuals. So don't take this as fact in terms of these games being not worth your time or effort. These are just ones that I was excited about, whether they were coming through crowdfunding or retail. And then when I actually got them and played them, something about them didn't hit the mark. Something about them wasn't enough for me to be happy with it, to keep it, essentially. So that could have either been around the game design, it could have potentially been around the illustrations, it might have been around certain concepts within the game, or maybe even just how certain mechanisms connect and intertwine and work together. Maybe the game felt like you were pulling a spreadsheet together. Like, there's all these different reasons why people might be disappointed by a game, and some of them could even be even more kind of outside of the game itself in terms of logistics and a bunch of other things. But regardless of everything outside of how a board game gets developed, I'm just talking about the core experience of playing the game. These are the 10 games I was excited to play, and when I played them, something just wasn't right. Number 10 on the list is Triplock. This one comes from Chip Theory Games, and I can tell you right now, I mean, you guys know me. Chip Theory Games is one of my favorite publishers, and they're one of the very first all-in pledges that I ever made was to Chip Theory Games. Now, it wasn't for Triplock. It was actually for Too Many Bones, but Triplock came out, and this was one that looked intriguing to me as a solo player. I thought this would be an interesting one because it has a lot of lockpicking involved, and the premise of the game is that you're going to do a lot of memorization as you go through it because you'll be trying to pick these locks, and you've got these different chips, and of course, chips and neoprene mats are what Chip Theory Games are all about. But essentially, you would move through rooms and you would use chips in order to unlock these locks, and you would try to remember what's on the opposite side of those chips as they're moving around, and you'd try to basically crack the code. Now, the problem with this is that I found the solo gameplay to be a little bit disconnected. I didn't find that the experience really brought me back. In other words, once I learned how to play this and I played it a couple times, I thought, interesting concept, but I felt like the game felt like more of a concept than an actual full game. It kind of felt like it was separated into sections of fun, but then disjointed when you actually talk about the entirety of the experience altogether. So for me, once I put it back on my shelf, it stayed there. And I think it stayed there for years, if I remember correctly. I think it took me about 3 to 4 years because the production value of Triplock was so high, as everything from Chip Theory Games is. I couldn't actually let myself get rid of it for a while. And then eventually I decided I would because I wasn't actually playing it. And this is a good example of one of the games from their library that just missed the mark for me in terms of what it was doing. You can see a description here. I won't go through the entirety of everything, but it's a very abstract game. It very much is. And from that aspect, it's very cool. And it's also a short played game. It's only take you 15 minutes or less to play through the game. So that's another element of the dissatisfaction potentially, is just going through it. And I remember going through it quite quickly too. Not that I was succeeding at everything I was doing per se, but the time just seemed a little bit too quick for me. And then again, like I said, it felt more like a proof of concept than it did an actual game. And so for that reason, this one ends up being on number 10 on my list. But I will say the disclaimer across the board for Chip Theory Games, everything they've released beyond Triplock, I've had a massive interest in, and I've also been very impressed with every single release. But this was one that really missed the mark for me. Number 9 on my list is Raxon. This one was repetitive. That's the best way to describe this one. And it was also, if I remember correctly, limited in terms of its release. I could be wrong on that, but I remember there being some kind of promotion around this one, being that it was hard to find, hard to get your hands on. But once you did, the issue with this one that I found being that it was very much a cooperative card game in the Dead of Winter universe, which really excited me because it sounded like it was going to take something that you couldn't play solo and then make it, it's a cooperative card game. So I was like, okay, now I can actually enjoy this. I actually got it, played it, and then as I played it more and more, the gameplay just felt the same on a loop. And a lot of the situational stuff that was going on just kind of repeated itself over and over and over again. So for me, this one just missed the mark. Okay. Are you going biking or what? Oh, that's right. You learned how to bike recently, didn't you?
Yeah, guess what? I can go
How fast?
really fast home.
Really? So you're saying I should stop this video right now and go watch you bike? Okay. Well, you know what? We're going to do that. We're going to stop right here. I'm going to come right back later on. But for now, this is my number 9. I think a lot of you guys will remember this one coming out and being played. I'll show you a couple images here before I jump off here with Serenity. She just learned how to ride her bike recently. So that's a huge accomplishment.
Without pedals.
Without pedals. Training wheels are now gone.
Training wheels gone forever. Yay!
Yep. You did an awesome job. So here's a couple pictures just so you can actually see the thing in action.
And I can go really fast.
Not really in action, but actually yesterday you were going pretty fast.
No, it can go.
All right. That's going to do it for number 9. We'll come back with number 8.
Bye.
And just like that, through the power of editing, we have moved to the next day. That clip you just saw of Serenity moments ago, we went outside, we enjoyed some biking, and then we didn't stop. And we did that for the entire day. And then we ended up coming back here, and it was way too late for me to continue. So here I am the next day. The sun is literally setting into my eyeballs. And yeah, that was not the original plan. But you know what? There was something special that occurred in the clip you just saw moments ago with Serenity. The day before that, we actually got her off of training wheels on her bicycle. So she learned to actually bike around the neighborhood. And now she is asking us nonstop to go biking. So because of that, I was more than willing to ditch anything I was doing in order to be there for those moments at the beginning, especially when she's learning and wants somebody to be there with her. And it's been a blast to see, because I remember that the freedom that you felt when you were a kid and you finally learned how to bike. There was nothing like that, because all you had prior to that was playing with your toys, and running would have been the most freeing feeling you had. But once you got a bike, it felt like you could get point A to point Z like that much faster. It just felt freeing, and it's a very special thing. So wanted to be there for her. Now we're back here with the list. We'll get back on track here. This is the number 8 position. I do apologize. Number 9's position got a little bit disjointed with her showing up, but hopefully that was kind of a nice guest appearance from her, because I didn't even expect her to come in the door. But here we are at number 8, Founders of Gloomhaven. So what is Founders of Gloomhaven? If you're not familiar with this one, as you can see, competitive tile placement, action selection, city building games. That's a huge mouthful. Now, why is this one on the list? Well, for me personally, it just didn't land. There was something about it that felt hollow, and I don't mean that to sound kind of harsh, but essentially that's what it was. The actual gameplay mechanics around the game itself and the mechanisms inside, I enjoyed them for what they were, but there wasn't anything to pull me back into the experience once I had played it once or twice. The idea, the premise of actually building Gloomhaven, because that's the idea behind it. You're founders of Gloomhaven. You're coming to this plot, this area of land. You're going to go ahead and build buildings, get resources, then spend resources to get advanced buildings, and then use those advanced buildings to get prestige points. And it kind of trickles on top of each other like a typical Euro game would. This one's going to have you doing all of that, but it just felt I was kind of just focused on the tasks of it. And for me, it just didn't have enough guts to really stay on my shelf long term. So it's not that the game was bad, it just didn't hit the mark. And then the other thing that made it kind of tough was its weight. Its weight is a 4.10 here on Board Game Geek, which is, I'd say it's pretty fair. Like, that's pretty accurate. It's on the heavier side of the equation. It's not like the heaviest thing I've ever played, but it's certainly heavy in terms of if you pair it with something where it doesn't feel like it has a lot of soul, I want to say, then it's really tough to kind of come back to it. Now, that's not to say other solo gamers are not enjoying this one. This is still a fun game for some people that enjoy city building. For me, city building is also not really a thing that I'm all that amped about in the first place. So for all those reasons, that was kind of why this ended up on the list and why it was kind of a disappointment to me. But I'll say a disclaimer across the board here. Everything that Isaac Childress has put together in Gloomhaven and in Frosthaven and Jaws the Lion has been, honestly, starting with Gloomhaven, has been groundbreaking for dungeon crawlers. Like, that mix, that perfect mix of Euro and Ameritrash kind of coming together. I love that. And to date, I'm still weekly playing Gloomhaven. And that just goes to show how much I enjoy the universe itself. And again, a great example of a really popular designer and a successful designer that still has the odd miss here and there. And that's the miss for me. It may not necessarily be a miss for him or for anybody else, but for me personally, it just didn't work for me. Some of you guys out there might say that this is a great game and you're playing it all the time and you love it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I'll show you some pictures here, a little bit more than I did, because I think I just talked more so than showed you anything about it. But it does have some nice artwork. It pulls again from the Gloomhaven universe. This one looks like the prototype, I think. But the prototype, again, and the final version were very, very close when they arrived. But yeah, overall, I mean, if you're interested in the universe in itself and you want to kind of see more about it, this one's going to give you that. But it's... Again, it didn't do it for me, so it didn't last long in my collection. The next game on the list, this one comes from Fantasy Flight Games, is Arkham Horror Final Hour. And I will say, I'm a pretty big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, so I was very excited when they announced this one because I was thinking, hey, here comes a new thing. Now, when this one originally landed, I started playing it, and I realized quite quickly that it wasn't doing anything that I didn't already have. I guess that's probably the best way to describe this one. Now, if you're looking for something that's super lightweight, very puzzly, and very quick turns, like, I mean, I'm talking like you can whip through this thing if you're playing solo quite fast, then it might be exactly what you're looking for, because it's essentially Arkham Horror pared down to probably the lowest level. But if you're kind of not, if you've already got that covered, I want to say, in other aspects, whether you already have Arkham Horror, maybe you have Eldritch Horror, maybe you have Arkham Horror LCG, like, there's so many of these variations that this one really only fits the, I need to play a game really quick and I need to have almost, not too much of a crunchy experience. And the other downside to this one I found too was the lack of a story really going on in this one. Like, it was kind of like it took all the cool elements of what Arkham Horror is known for, which is kind of like chaos and just abnormal stories intertwined together, but it still kind of weaves together into some type of narrative. Same thing with Eldritch Horror. But with this one, it just felt kind of like it was like that was almost like stripped out of the experience, and it really wasn't flushed out. So by doing that, it kind of made it just like, okay, here's a quick and dirty Arkham Horror game to play. So that's not a bad thing to say, but it didn't land for me. I kind of went, well, I've already got this in multiple other iterations, and in other iterations, I'd probably rather spend my time in. So for me personally, this was one, unfortunately, that disappointed me. So this was a very quick sell. In the number 6 position of my top 10 solo games, which disappointed me, Super Dungeon Explorer. This one comes from Soda Pop Miniatures and Ninja Division. This one, now I didn't get on the train when this one first came out in 2011. I was very much busy with Zombicide, Lord of the Rings Living Card Game, and Mage Knight at the time. Those three were enough to keep anybody busy because those were very, very popular games in that 2011 timeframe. But this one creeped up on my radar down the line as another iteration came out, and I believe it was called Forgotten King, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. And it was 2015 when this one came out. You can see it kind of got a little bit progressively better in terms of the rating. It almost went from kind of like a fairly good to a good, or, to basically a good. weight of this thing in terms of look and feel. If you have no idea what this thing is about, here's a quick blurb. You can pause the screen to read it if you wish. But basically, dungeon crawler in essence, you're going to be going through a number of tiles. There's going to be kind of like preset situated enemies in groups, and they're going to exist on these tiles. They're going to try to get through those tiles and make it through the gauntlet essentially. The premise of this one, this is a really terrible picture. You guys can't even really see it, so that is very blurry. Let's find one. This is better. Here's a picture of what the game looks like. Now, when you see the game on the table, the first thing you're going to say is like, it does look interesting. And if you remember, if you can picture yourself back that many years ago, you might have gone, oh, like this is very intriguing, because, you know, there weren't many games that looked like this, and it had nice dice. They were translucent. It was a dungeon crawler. The miniatures were colored. The tiles were double-sided. They were quite nice looking. So like, if you were into Zombicide when that was getting popular, like this kind of would draw you in a little. You'd be like, oh, what's this all about? Here's the problem. As you play through the game more and more, you realize, very much probably in the same realm as Founders of Gloomhaven, like it's kind of a canned experience in terms of like you're placing enemy sets into certain tiles. You're kind of going through the gauntlet, and that's it. The actual lore, the actual storytelling is non-existent, but the game world feels alive. It's a weird thing. It's almost like you're playing it and you're like, wow, this could be so much more. And then you play it and you're like, yikes, this is like as bare bones as it gets, and it just feels like there's something missing that would just make this game kind of feel full in terms of like completely designed from end to end. And what they ended up trying to do in order to nip that as time went on was they tried to put out what I believe was called Super Dungeon Legends. Oh my gosh. I haven't even looked. This is terrible. So I'll just say this right now. I have not looked at this, nor have I cared about this for years. But back when I played The Forgotten King, I was intrigued when this campaign landed. For me personally, I was thinking, hey, maybe if I pick up all the stuff that's in Legends, this game will become the game that I'm hoping it will be. And I think there was a bunch of people that kind of got on board with that mindset during the time of the campaign. I'm going to tell you right now, honestly, I have no idea where this campaign stands. I don't know if it's partially delivered, never going to be delivered, whatever. It says 2023. That doesn't sound good, because this has been sitting for ages. So there's no way this thing, I'd be very surprised. I'm going to have to go into the Kickstarter page itself and actually find it, because it's pretty bad. I don't even know where this thing landed, but I'll tell you that I had my own money on the edge of being dropped into their lap to back it, and then for some weird reason I didn't. And I don't know if it's because I pivoted, because at the time I was interested in like Lord of the Rings, or something else was sucking my money away, but I decided not to. Maybe it was something to do with like what they were presenting kind of turned me off. But for whatever reason, I didn't back it, and now in retrospect, or in hindsight, I definitely am okay with that. I feel very bad for individuals that ended up, because I could have just as easily gone ahead and put the money in, and then I'd probably be sitting in a really terrible position. I think that's where some people are right now, and I definitely feel for those individuals. Now, this is one I never covered in any great length on the channel. I think I might have done an unboxing for Forgotten King when I first got it. I don't think I played it. I don't remember playing it on the channel at all. I think it was just kind of like a side interest that I was intrigued by, but knew it wasn't really all that I wanted it to be. But long story short, this disappointed me. That's the end of the story. This one just didn't hit the mark, and it's really sad, because I really thought that this one had like life to it. It had the potential to be a very, very cool game, and it also had a lot of expansions to bring in lots of different miniatures that would change up the gameplay. It was like I said, very colorful, very alive, just hollow in terms of what you can do. We've now reached top 5 territory on my top 10 solo games which disappointed me. In the number 5 position, Lords of Hellas. This one coming from Awaken Realms, and wow. Take a look at my game shelf here. Right through the middle, you got This War of Mine, Aetherfields, Nemesis, Lockdown, and the original. We've got Lords of Ragnarok. I'll talk about that in a second. We got Tainted Grail, The Great Wall. I've got a whole string. ISS Vanguard's in there sideways as well. Every solo game that has been released from Awaken Realms after Lords of Hellas has been A-okay in my books. No issues whatsoever across the board on any of them. Lords of Hellas, though, was one of their first. I think that was when, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know 100%. It wasn't the first time that they had done solo, but I think it was the first time they tried to do solo in a game designed like this. This is a dudes on a map situation. You're building temples, you're defeating monsters, but you're basically trying to dominate the game board. So it's very much, situated towards a multiplayer mindset. That's essentially how they built this one out. They did have a solo mode. The major critiques around this one for me personally, and from what I've heard from others as well, is that if you purchase the entire Kickstarter, you're only using a sliver of the content inside the solo mode. So that's disappointing. You spend a bunch of money and you can barely use half the stuff, not even half the stuff to play the solo mode. The other thing is that just in terms of what the solo mode was, it wasn't all that great. There was kind of loopholes and kind of some kinks with it as well that kind of had to be patched up with additional rules and stuff like that. It was kind of, it wasn't even half baked. It was kind of quarter baked, to be honest. And but the cool thing is again, when a publisher has a misstep like that, and I think they did put an honest effort in trying to put together a solo mode for it. They just stumbled doing it. But they learned from that, and then when they came out with a number of games after the fact, I have no issues. Like literally, I have no issues with any of those solo modes at all. They're all full-fledged. They all feel great. And when you actually pick up a pledge from Awakened Realms now and it has anything to do with solo, you're not getting some quarter-baked product anymore. And that's a huge win for them, right? And every publisher might go through that development cycle of kind of like, okay, we're opening the door on solo play a little bit more than we normally do, and then go, oh, well, that wasn't a good idea. And then they kind of learn from it and move on. That's kind of what this list is all about. It's not necessarily saying these games are garbage, because Lords of Hellas as a multiplayer game is fantastic. It's literally awesome. But in terms of a solo game, you're going to play it a handful of times, and once you've kind of beaten it a few times, you're going to be like, okay, I've got it. I'm done. You're going to probably use it more so for learning it to play multiplayer than you would to actually play it solo. But you can tell me in the comments if I'm wrong. There might be people that are still playing this thing today. But I will say this. Not only have they upped their game in terms of solo play across the board, but Lords of Ragnarok is the most recent iteration of what Lords of Hellas tried to do with that genre, that realm, whatever you want to call it. And this time around, they did a bang up job of the solo mode. The actual solo play in this one is what you want to get. So if you have Lords of Hellas on the shelf and you're kind of going, I don't know if I want to keep it anymore, but I don't have anything else like it that I can replace it with, somehow you missed the memo on Lords of Ragnarok. So go check it out, because it literally is the game that you probably wanted to have the first time around. If you don't have Lords of Hellas and you don't have Lords of Ragnarok might be your first entryway into this, and you might have a lot of fun with this one. I've been hearing great things about it, so it's cool to see them not only just adjust how much love they put into the solo community in products going forward, but they actually went back essentially and redid the wrong, I want to say. Again, you had to repurchase a different game and stuff like that, but like they still made that, and that's awesome. That just goes to show how popular that Lord of Hellas game was, even standing on its own for multiplayer, and able to go back, revisit it, rebuild it, completely different new game, and then tack on a really good solo mode inside of it. And I shouldn't even say tack on, because it's not tacked on. So yeah, in terms of disappointment, Lord of Hellas is up there for solo play. In terms of multiplayer, fantastic. But we're talking solo games here, and so this one missed the mark. We're getting into the higher end of this list now. Number 4 on the top 10 solo games, which disappointed me, is Dragonfire. Now, I remember going to Gen Con, I think it was 2018, so it was a year after Dragonfire was released, and so some expansions started to come out for this one. If you're not familiar with this, you're probably familiar with Shadowrun Crossfire, which is a really well-known and well-liked solo game. It doesn't have a super high rating here by any means, but it's well liked and it's well enjoyed. But Dragonfire for me was, I don't know. It's really hard for me to really put this into words. This all the other ones I feel like I could go on for quite a while as to maybe why I didn't like them. This one I think it had a lot of promise, and it was intriguing and interesting. And there are some people that really got into this. And I'm not going to say this is a bad game across the board. There's people that are still playing this game and still like it. And there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It just, for me, felt, I don't know. It felt kind of generic, I want to say. Like it had an interesting premise in what it was trying to accomplish and stuff like that. And the expansions that were added out for it, we actually punched out quite a bit in the early time frame with promo cards and everything else. That's a lot of the stuff that I saw at Gen Con when I was able to acquire a bunch of this, but I ended up selling all of it because it just didn't hit the mark. So if you're wondering, it's a cooperative deck building game. When you say deck building game and you say Dungeons and Dragons, usually that'll get people's attention pretty pretty fast. So you're able to play between dwarfs, elves, half orcs, a whole bunch of different things. And of course, you go through a number of different scenarios, and some of these cards have really cool holographic effects on them, as you saw in some of the pictures. And the gameplay is good and everything else, but it just, again, and this is another draw for me, Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter, and the Waterdeep, like all this stuff around Dungeons and Dragons, like it's an instant draw when it's a board game for me. But I remember playing it, and I remember playing a couple games, and then I just had absolutely no drive to play it anymore. And the worst part about it was that I actually kind of did the worst thing you can do, which is purchase the core game and a bunch of expansions all at once, thinking I was going to love it because I needed to have it all in order to kind of feel like I was whole inside. And then I opened the core box and I played it, and I was like, oh, I think I made a mistake. And I think I was actually even planning to play it on the channel at the time frame and to show people it. And I remember I might have unboxed it, but I think I immediately was like, I'm not showing this on the channel, because I've, like, for me, it's like, if I don't actually think this is something that I want to like put out there, I just don't. If I'm not going to enjoy it, I'm not going to spend time on putting content together for it. And this was probably one of those examples that it just didn't work for me. I did end up actually buying Shadowrun Crossfire, the re-implemented version, which I think is, I don't know if they actually have it hidden in all this. This one, Prime Runner. So if you are looking, if you like the gameplay of Dragonfire, or you liked the original Shadowrun Crossfire, then you might want Prime Runner, because Prime Runner, I think, is a better version. It's also kind of a reprinted but more up-to-date version of the original one. And I don't have this one anymore. I purchased this one and I let it go. You can see in my previously owned collection, but that's mainly because I kind of felt like I was swamped with card games. So this one's kind of bleeding from Dragonfire entry all the way to Shadowrun now. But I wanted to mention both because they kind of go hand in hand, and one is the other. Like, you're just changing out theme and a few other different elements of the gameplay, but nothing major. But you have options there. So if you are looking for a deck builder that kind of falls in either of those two camps of themes, you might be interested in this one. For me, I had too many card games already, so I just couldn't justify kind of a good to very good card game being jammed in the mix. I needed something that was more like very good to excellent. We have now reached top 3 territory on the list of my solo games, which disappointed me, and I think this one might be on a bunch of your guys' list too, maybe. Myth. This one was a disappointment for me for sure, and I'll explain my reasoning as to why. So I remember picking this one up used first off. So I kind of went like, oh, nice, I get it used. It's a cooperative dungeon crawler. It's a fantasy game essentially, right? So it's there's a lot of these around, right? So you're kind of looking for something new, something different, something that like kind of throws something at you you've never seen before. And I mean, honestly, if I looked at it from that perspective, Myth was very different than anything else I'd ever seen, because it was very much like a sandbox design of, here is the game world, here's what you could do, but you just figure out what you want to do. Like that literally is like, that would have been the motto for the game, I think. You go into it, and I think what most people would want, even in a sandbox game like this, is they'd want, when they first open up the rule book and they go through the first handful of pages of setup and stuff like this for whatever the first scenario is, or whatever they're trying to present, is like, here's a fun example of what the game can be like. It needs to be somewhat structured for that, at least. And I felt like when I was even setting that up, the way that it was being worded and talked about kind of felt like they were trying to tell you from the very beginning that this was like a sandbox, and you might, you could, you would, you should. Like, it was so kind of all over the place in terms of just like, yeah, you can kind of play like that. You can kind of put this here, but you don't have to put that there. You kind of just went through the rulebook and realized like, okay, so this is kind of like me just putting things down and trying stuff. And that, I mean, I don't know what it is about that, but that just rubbed me the wrong way, because I was kind of going like, that's fine if you have a structure at the beginning to show how the game could be. Like, if you said, here's how to set up the scenario exactly, here's exactly how to play this scenario, here's an example of how much fun you're going to have. Now that you understand the structure, now take these elements, make them loosey-goosey, and go find and have some fun with it and go crazy. Maybe that would have worked. I remember opening up the rulebook, getting like 6 to 8 pages in, and just wanting to close it immediately, because I just started reading it and going like, it sounds like they're trying to tell me to come up with stuff as I'm reading it. And that frustrated me, because I was like, it's teaching me cool aspects, but it's also telling me to kind of do things if I feel like it. And I just could not get past that. the premise, the idea, the thought, everything around it seemed so intriguing and cool. But man, did this thing ever like fall on its face? Especially when there were so many people that were really excited this thing would be something that had never been seen before. And in that way, I guess it's true. It had never been seen, but not in the way that it probably wanted to be remembered. Now, it's not to say, again, that this isn't a game that other people might enjoy. People could still be playing this today and still love it, because if you wrap your head around it and you kind of let your imagination go wild, you could probably come up with all kinds of craziness. And I'm sure if I went into the file section here, I'm sure some people have done all kinds of fun, crazy FAQs and come up with their own like ways of creating quest trackers and dungeons and stuff. So maybe some of the stuff that was issues originally have been kind of ironed out, but it's like far too late in the game, I think, for me to dive back in at this point, in terms of especially the weight on this game versus the reward. Long story short, this might hit the mark for you. It says here that this was re-implemented by Myth Dawn of Heroes, so this looks like it's coming back. I didn't even know that. I think maybe I did know that. Is this a cooperative? Yeah, this looks like it's actually coming back. So even though the original Myth was on this list, now I'm seeing this and I'm kind of going, I wonder if they've learned from what happened with the very first one, and they're looking to kind of close those potential holes and come out with something that actually might be decent. I mean, that's kind of exciting to see. It's again, it's always nice to see when like something kind of doesn't go exactly the way maybe the designer, the publisher, the artist, the team that put this thing together wanted originally, but then to see them give it another go. Exact same situation as Lord of Hellas and then Lords of Ragnarok. Like, it's kind of like it's a learning experience, right? It's not necessarily to say this game is garbage, don't bother ever creating anything ever again. It's just a stepping stone to the next thing. And so if they come out with something here that is new, I would be interested in actually checking it out. I'm certainly not on the train of thought of like holding a grudge against the person that creates a game that it doesn't jive with me, or just eliminating that individual or that publisher from the equation. So I'm intrigued. I didn't even know that this thing was a thing until just seconds ago. So now I've got something to look into. The second position of my top 10 solo games which disappointed me is Discover Lands Unknown. This one coming from Fantasy Flight Games. This is the second one on the list from Fantasy Flight Games, and man, was this one interesting, to say the least. Now, the premise of this one was cool in that this game was a survival game. So first off, if you know anything about me, you know that I'm a fan of the survival type of board game or card game. I love that. This War of Mine is one of my favorite games. And it has survival to its very core. When this was originally announced, not only was it survival, as you can see here, it says crafting, hunting, collaborating to survive the wilderness, and each copy is unique. This was literally pushed as one of the biggest marketing things that was going on with this one at the time. And that's what got everybody kind of stirred up going, wow, that sounds really cool, because if I buy one and then somebody else buys one, we're going to have different terrain to explore. We're going to have different cards that associate themselves with that terrain. Like, that sounds really awesome. Now, if I take a look at this Discover Lands Unknown box here, there's 4 terrain types showing here, but I believe there's actually 6 different types, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong. So when you get a game of Discover Lands Unknown and you open it up, and I did this on my channel, so if you want to search on my channel for Discover Lands Unknown dual unboxing, I went in Edmonton, which is where I'm living. It's in Alberta in Canada. I went to one store on one side of the city, and then I went to another. I actually purchased the other one. I think I purchased the other one online, if I remember correctly. So I kind of like purchased them from like 2 different areas. And the online one I think came from either Toronto or BC, or it could have been that I bought both in Edmonton at 2 different locations in Edmonton. I can't remember how I broke it up, but either way, they weren't from the same place, regardless. And I put both boxes on the table, and I literally unboxed them without knowing what was inside of them. So I did it like without knowing in advance what I was going to do, right? And that's how I do my unboxings. I just run into things as I go and explain them and walk through them. So it was really interesting because I unboxed the first one. You could see my excitement as I went through it. It was like, oh, this is really cool. I got the bayou, and I think I got like the island terrain. So I was kind of like, oh, that's a very cool combination. It's going to be so much fun. And of course, you got all the cards and everything else, and some of those are unique as well, and that's all cool. So I showed all that stuff. And then I went to open up the second box, and in the back of my head, I'm thinking like, okay, I mean, like there's 6 different terrain types. Like there's a chance here that I could get a duplicate set of terrain, or but hopefully I won't. Maybe I'll get 1 duplication at the worst. I literally opened the box up, and the terrain was exactly the same, and the decks of cards inside the box also matched in terms of what was printed in the deck. So I don't know if their original plan was to print a run of the game with certain terrain, then give it a couple weeks, run it again with a different terrain, and maybe by purchasing 2 at the same time, that was a bad idea. But regardless, it broke the whole premise to me of each copy being unique, because to me, the biggest aspect of a survival game is not all the rinky-dink cards that you get to interact with as you go through the terrain. It's the terrain itself. If you're in the desert, or if you're in the wilderness, that's where you're spending the majority of your time. So if you purchase 2 copies and you get the exact same terrain, you're already kind of like, well, that was a waste. And that just broke it for me. Now, I will say this. The game itself is being enjoyed, and some people still play it to this day and still enjoy it. I'm going to tell you right now that I honestly packed the games up and I sold them because I was so disappointed in getting carbon copies across 2 boxes based on the marketing, which was that each copy would be unique, that I couldn't and wouldn't be bothered even entertaining it. So that's kind of harsh. And on the inside the unboxing video, you can actually tell when I kind of open up the second box and I'm kind of trying to get through it, but you can also tell that I'm kind of confused that I actually opened the box and saw the exact same thing that I saw in the prior box. And I'm just trying, like, I get to the end of the video, and then that's off camera. I start really digging into it. I'm just like, wow, like wow. there's no other way to say it. Now, the one thing I will say is that Discover Lands Unknown came out, I believe, before Keyforge did, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the aim, I think, around Discover Lands Unknown was to see whether this unique concept would work with a board game. It's obviously much more difficult to make it work with a board game because you've got cards, you've got boards, you've got terrain, you've got character cards. Like, there's so many different aspects to make unique. But then what they did, I think, is they took what they did with Discover Lands Unknown, and then they kind of were also churning along with the Keyforge idea in the background too. And they were just going with a card game. And it worked so much better in a card game fashion when you're just dealing with unique cards. That's much easier to print, much easier to manage. You're trying to make, board game terrain unique, the standard size cards unique, the mini cards unique, the character cards unique. Like, you start doing that, and the management of that becomes like a logistical nightmare, I think, for any company. So I think that's the reason why this idea sounded amazing, but then utterly tanked in execution. Now, could it be pulled off in the future from somebody who maybe takes a little bit more care with the idea and maybe prints it in a different way by staging it or whatever? There's a lot of work to be had in that, but it could be done. But I haven't seen anybody try to attempt it to the level that they tried to push it marketing wise. Long story short, this was a disappointment because I was literally pumped to play it, and that was like taking the balloon of excitement and just putting a pin straight through it the second I saw the terrain. I was like, I'm done. I'm putting the lid on it, and I'm putting these up on in a Facebook group to sell. Like, I'm done. And they were gone. So this one deserves a solid number 2. And we've now reached the very top slot of the top 10 solo games, which disappointed me. And in the first position, it is First Martians: Adventures on the Red Planet. I remember when this game was originally announced. I remember how excited I was for this one. I remember knowing that I'm such a huge fan of Robinson Crusoe, so I was like, the chances that this was going to be a hit for me was like off the charts. Now, if you don't know anything about Robinson Crusoe, I'll quickly mention it. A much better reviewed game overall, a much more well-loved and well-received game overall in the solo community. This is one that I already enjoyed and is honestly best to play solo, in my opinion, beyond anything else. I played this one 2-player, actually, and I really didn't enjoy it that much. I felt like this truly is a solo playable game. The weight on this one's actually quite heavy too, similar to First Martians, but I will speak to something before I get into the aspects of why First Martians was a disappointment for me, and it really stems from, the first one stems from what I know about Robinson Crusoe in terms of its design, and that's that Robinson Crusoe kind of starts you off with a set situation and set goals, and you kind of have all these things around you that you can interact with and do and whatever else, but it kind of starts you in the shallow end of the pool at least, and then you work your way up. You kind of see how things work, and then you see how things come at you and how to mitigate them. but you kind of get to see how things work first before you have to mitigate them. You might have to mitigate a thing here or there to start things off, but for the most part, I should say, you get a chance to actually get yourself going. First Martians kind of flipped that on its head, and that kind of leads into my first big con with this one, and the fact that they basically said, well, instead of you starting in the shallow end of the pool and kind of get going from there, we're going to start you in the deep end. We're going to give you everything in terms of what the game has to manage, at least at a high level, and the high levels a lot. And then we're going to start breaking things almost from the beginning. So instead of you getting a good idea as to how things are running when things are running well, things are just really never running well, if that makes sense. You're just constantly dealing with stuff falling apart, and that mentality or that design doesn't lend itself very well to new players coming in who are trying to learn the experience, and it also doesn't give players much incentive to come back to the game, because if the game is hurting you so heavily from the beginning and you don't even understand the premise of how those things work, how those different aspects of the game design bounce or ping pong off each other, you know, if something breaks over here, you're just kind of like, whatever, not going to worry about it. I'll go do something else. And all of a sudden, oh my gosh, that actually impacted me in this way that I had no idea. Like, you're kind of learning about all the cons before you know the pros. And it's kind of all backwards. And it doesn't present a good learning experience. And the other thing that's hard too is that it puts all the learning at the front end of the experience, which I don't think anybody really wants. Like, nobody signs up for a board game saying, please give me all the advanced rules first so that I can get to the end of the game and find the fun. Like, that just sounds like a job. And that's kind of First Martians basically slid into it felt like a job category. That's really what it did at the end. So those are a couple things right there. The other big red flag for me was when, and most of you guys know this by this point anyway, but Rodney Smith from Watch It Played is my uncle, and he put together the instructional video. The guy is like a pro. I mean, there's nobody else that can actually take a rule book and make it as concise as possible in a video format and make it as watchable as him in terms of instructional videos. Like, if you're going to watch to learn a game rather than read a rule book, far more enjoyable to listen to him describe the rule book and see things go in real time than to actually read the rule book yourself. So I was very excited when he said he was doing his how to play, and I think he even released it before the game came out as kind of like a pre-release to the release date of the game. I believe it might have been within a day or a couple days or whatever. I remember turning it on. I remember starting to watch it. I didn't even notice that the runtime was over 50 minutes. I did not notice that. I just clicked on the video and started watching. And I think about 5 to 10 minutes in, that's when I started to look. I was kind of like, okay, I wondered like how far into this I am, because it's starting to get kind of interesting. And then I was like, oh, it's 15 minutes long. I'm like, interesting. So then I went to the 15-minute mark, and I was like, okay, like this looks cool. Like, it looks interesting, but it's also starting to get like, what I was noticing was I had to basically rewind it 3 minutes and watch it. And then I'd rewind a minute and watch more, and then rewind, like, so I wasn't really progressing through the video. And this is nothing against Watch It Play. This is nothing against Rodney whatsoever. It was that he had done such a good job in condensing and streamlining the learning process of First Martians into a video format that it was dense. So it was so dense that you had to, like, in order to understand what was actually going on, you kind of had to like watch a bit and then go, yeah, I don't know if that really stuck in my head. Let's go back a step. And I never do that. I don't think there's ever a board game where I've gone like, I need to like rewind the video multiple times throughout it to the point where I'm like, this is embarrassing for me to try to figure out what the heck's going on. And then I remember getting to the 30-minute mark and going like, I guess this goes back to my balloon analogy, where it's like you have this balloon of hope and excitement and passion for a particular game that you're excited about, and then you have the pin of reality, and it's like it just comes into your head all of a sudden and it just pops, and you're just like, I no longer care. I'm like, I pre-ordered the game and I wanted to play it, and now I don't. And it had nothing to do with his video. Could not have been any better. There's no way he could have structured that video to make me want to play the game. But what I did end up doing was, in that moment, the passion to play it died. The game showed up in the mail. I still opened it up. I still set it up, and I did try to play it. And then I remember just getting through the first half, I want to say, or quarter of the game. And again, I kind of pulled it as video to try to do it in tandem. I couldn't do it. I couldn't. Again, it was one of those games that just didn't have joy or excitement or any kind of real pull or desire from me anyway, personally, to want to continue playing it. Now, there were people that actually jumped on this and loved the premise of starting in the deep end of the pool and kind of having things go crazy and having to mitigate all this stuff. I believe, and I'll say this now, is that as time went on with this one, they did put out a lot of FAQs. They did put out a lot of information around this one to make the whole experience better. So I know I've been rambling for a bit here, but I'll show you some pictures of the actual board itself so you can kind of see how it looks. It's a very busy looking game, and there's lots of like individual cubes and different tracks, and you're kind of tracking different things that are going on as the base. You're kind of exploring around it, and like there's things ping-ponging off each other, but there's a lot to kind of get into your head. And it's not necessarily that each of those individual things is tough to understand. It's more so that it's tough to understand how they all intertwine while everything's breaking at the same time. And I think that's kind of what made this thing such a rough go. But as I'll get back to, which is the point around, I think as the years went on, if you go into the files section in here, you'll find like an unofficial manual rewrite or a rules summary, an FAQ. So people started to go ahead and say, you know what? The way that the game is introducing the learning aspect of this is setting people up for failure. It's putting people in a very aggressive kind of path, and it's not really conducive to really like getting a chance for the game to shine. So there's been a number of individuals that have tried to put together a better path learning this thing. And again, nothing against the How to Play for Rodney Smith. That's probably still referenced to this day for people that are trying to consume it. And it's probably, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of what's been put together by the publisher as well as unofficial stuff, Portal Games, has bolstered the learning experience, and then people then go to watch it play's video, and all the things that are being talked about in that dense video make sense. It's just they don't make sense when it's condensed down because the game was so expansive in what it was trying to do. The crazy thing is about First Martians is that it's not like, if you laid it out on the table, it's not like the most complex looking game in the world. It's not Feudum. Like, it's not like you laid out Feudum and you're just like staring at it and you're going like, wow, this is going to take me a while to really comprehend what the heck's going on here, and how everything interplays. But First Martians, I mean, I think because of the things that were breaking in it, which is part of the game design, on top of the fact it was kind of a bit much to understand how things intertwined, you add those two things together, and that just takes the complexity to like, it just throws it right out the window. It just goes right up there. So that's all I'm going to say about that one. I don't know what else to say. I would be very interested at some point, and I did actually think about picking this one up used to try it again, to give it another shot, to see whether it's actually possible to enjoy this one at this point, or whether this one is kind of drifted off into the sunset. But for me, based on the publisher, the designer, my super happiness with Robinson Crusoe, I really, really was looking forward to this one. It just didn't hit for me whatsoever. So let me know in the comments down below, which games from my list do you agree were disappointments for you, that you disagree were not disappointments for you, and also, even more importantly, let me know games that were not on this list that you actually found to be a disappointment. I would love to hear those comments down below. And also, don't just put the title of the game that you found to be a disappointment. Actually put some detail around why it actually is a disappointment for you, because I think that's really going to help other individuals that are looking into games kind of narrow down ones that they might be thinking about, and maybe ones that aren't going to be a fit for them. And so again, this list is not meant to point out in any way, shape, or form publishers, designers, artists, writers, anybody in terms of terrible work. It's just to say that these 10 games for me did not fit what my expectations. That's really what it comes down to. I had high expectations for these ones, and they just didn't meet it. But it is really cool to see, like I said multiple times throughout the video, how many of these designers, artists, publishers have come back with games that I have really enjoyed, or maybe even like in the case of this one here with Robinson Crusoe, already created games that I'm already enjoying. So it just goes to show that the designer that may not line up with you in one game might line up with you in the next game, or the artist that you're seeing in one particular board game you may not be really a fan of, but then in the next iteration you're going, wow, that's actually really good, I like that. So these things ebb and flow over time, and people are always in a constant state of learning. So take it all with a grain of salt. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate it. And as always, keep on rolling solo.